So I better read a public notice. I don't know that we got any public with us, but yes, we do. Okay. So give me a minute here. So this is a public meeting, basically. Well, it's not quite a public meeting. It's a session, basically. Public can observe, but they can't involve themselves with discussion here. Any comments that the public may want to make would have to be made in a zoning meeting, in a public zoning meeting, just to let everybody know. So this is a Board of Appeals workshop group subcommittee meeting, May 3rd at 4 o'clock. Consistent with the governor's orders of extending certain provisions for the open meeting law, every effort will be made to allow public to review and listen to the meeting in real time. If you do not have a camera or a microphone on your computer, you may use the following dial-in number: 1-301-715-8592, meeting ID 870-7168-3113, code 444509. Please only use dial-in or computer and not both, as audio feedback will distort the meeting. This meeting will be audio and visual recorded in compliance with the American Disabilities Act. This location is accessible to people with disability. Wakefield provides a reasonable accommodation and or language assistance free of charge upon request. If you are a person with disability and require information or material in any alternate format, or you require any other accommodations, please contact the town disabilities coordinator, William Renault Engineering, at 781-246-6308 as far as advanced as the event as possible. Every effort will be made to grant your request. Advance notification will enable the town to make reasonable arrangements to remove any accessible barriers for you. So with roll call, I guess I'm Jim McBain from the zoning board, and quite often lead these little events. And my partner on this from the ZBA is Tom Lucy. Tom, wave your hand.
I'm here.
And then you have the applicant and their engineers. So at this point, we're talking about 596 North Avenue. And we, just for those particularly in the public that don't know what happens here, is that we, instead of this going through the board on an endless nightly tramp, basically, because what happens quite often is that in the past, at least, we've been working very, very late to do these things. So the board sometime back decided that a subcommittee would be formed to work with the applicant to come up with ideas, design, or whatever, basically layouts that would suit what the board's direction has been, or at least feeling has been, and then eventually go back to the board for further discussion or presentation as to where this group has got. This group will not, basically cannot vote at this time. They will vote as members at a zoning board meeting. There only is a working group to help push this along in one direction or another in sort of a guidance. So that's what happens here. And we will eventually be making presentations at a public meeting where, in fact, any of the public that wants to bring up issues at that time can. If this was to come up with issues, basically, then this group would probably go back and deal with those issues at that time, if directed by the chair of the ZBA. So with that, let me say, the way I see this going forward over the next few meetings, and it won't be one meeting, there'll be several, so everybody has their opportunity to listen over several times, is I want to address the master plan massing of this building on the site. We will eventually get to a point where we're talking about the planning of the building internally and its effect on the character of the building on the outside. So we're not talking about three-dimensional aspects of this building. And I know that the neighborhood has concerns on that. We will also involve a member, I think it's maybe Jessica can fill me in. It was a member of the COMCOM basic, I guess, that looks at, it works in the field basically on issues. So we'll probably bring them in at some time to talk about particularly what we're going to talk about shortly. And then we'll get eventually into materials and colors and that sort of thing. So it will take a bunch of meetings basically to get this resolved. So with that, I'm going to, if anybody wants to say anything from the applicant side, you can start now. Otherwise, I'm going to bring something up and walk everybody through it.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. McBain. Just for the record, my name is Attorney Jesse Schomer, representing the applicant. My client, Dana Lopez, he is the principal of 0 North Ave Wakefield LLC. He's here tonight and look forward to a productive conversation about this. And also present on the call tonight, Chris Sparages of Williams and Sparages, and Peter Sandors and Andrew Jones of Phoenix Architects. We appreciate everyone making the time, including members of the public who are on the line tonight. With respect to the wetlands conservation issue, we have reached out to Elaine Vreeland, who's one of the 2 conservation agents for the town, and she's indicated that either she or Rebecca, the other agent, will be willing to attend one of these. So we'll be able to get their feedback on that issue. Obviously, the site has a lot of wetlands on it, and that's a sensitive issue. We understand that everybody is paying close attention to that, and we are as well. So. Unless members of my team have anything to add at this time, why don't we jump in with what you were going to show, Jim?
All right, now this may not be as fast as we'd like it to be. So let me see if I can pull up my screen. All right, so I've taken the time to look at this site, and with Tom and I basically, and this is the site as you look across North Avenue. The current building, one current building to the right is here, which was done a few years ago. You can just barely see in the background here the abutter on the other side, and so it's pretty overgrown. Trees, although in this particular photograph there are no leaves on it, you can see quite a few trees. They're not in the most healthy condition, quite frankly. They're just swamp grown basically, and it is what it is. So in looking at this, we can see that there's a large abutter population basically in here that are single family homes, and one abutter here basically being the Knights of Columbus, which is active at times and not so active at other times. You've got the 2 buildings here that are previously built in the last few years. And you got the site, or at least the building location approximately in here that would sort of mimic the other buildings in a way, at least in the fact that it forms a wall. Across the street, you have another wall, which is brick and is the office park. And then, of course, you got everybody else in the neighborhood. So I think my thinking is, and Tom's thinking is, we got to do something with the layout of this here. And this is what's proposed. And it might be slightly outdated only because I think there was a newer update than this, but still pretty much the same. I think the other one was where it got flipped. But it doesn't matter basically at this point. So parking down through here, parking here, an under drain system in here, and of course the building here. We're looking at this, and if you see the whole block, you can see the new building, the proposed building, the two other buildings on this side. The office park is across the street here, and the residential basically starts right in here and keeps on going down the street, and then picks up after the Knights of Columbus building. So our thoughts are, we've got to do something with these buildings to break them down. Now, quite often we'll take height off the buildings, quite often we'll take units out of the building. But in this case, I see that the possibility is that we break this building up and basically slip it, not so much change it. It would still be about the same mass, but slip it along the edges so it pulls its way off the road and almost aligns up with the Knights of Columbus building, and at the same time puts a lot more trees back in than probably would be proposed normally. So it gives it back, gives the area back, basically what's there now with tree covering. So it shields it more from the neighborhood, but at the same time acts as a transition point, pulling in basically along the street. So it's not so visible. And if you note that it also is pulling back from what is the first part of the residential in these houses in here, which continue down the street. So what's that look like? So this was a first attempt at doing this, but as you can see, the wetlands edge comes pretty close to a retaining wall. Now, all the other two buildings basically all have retaining walls. This, as originally proposed, just sloped down, and there are no retaining walls in this. In this one, basically, there is, like I say, I think the one that got flipped had retaining walls over in here in this part. Since I don't have that, a copy of that, I wasn't able to incorporate it. So taking a look at this a little bit more, oh, the other thing was putting more trees along this edge, putting clusters of trees along here, basically. By pulling these back, you're allowed to get more front yard and more trees and more cover, basically. And at the same time, trees across the back. And looking at that, I said, well, this is retaining walls going to be kind of difficult. So by putting a joint in the parking area, basically, and bending it a bit from what that is to this, we get further away from wetlands, and assumingly some sort of retaining wall can go along there if necessary. That would give you from this option to something like this, and would pull back away from the neighborhood in this whole thing. Now, the issue then becomes in this, I assumed basically based on the previous projects that were done down there, what the dimension from the wetlands over would be for retaining wall to sit. This would require some input from Chris and Rebecca or Ellen, basically, as to where we want to be. And I know that Chris had mentioned, depending on the classification of this area in here, will depend on how far this project has to set back from the edge. So given what I've looked at and proposed, I guess I'd like some response from your team, Jesse.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Jim. That's obviously a lot of work has gone into what you've done here. Peter and Andrew, do you have any initial response to this that you can go into, and then maybe we'll get into the wetlands issue that Chris can discuss?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from what you're showing, splitting it, I think it would work. We'd have to look at just, shifting some of the units around to, get the hallways and the stairwells to work. But from an architectural standpoint, I mean, I can see it working. Of course, we're going to want to try to maintain the amount of units we have. So there's probably gonna be some shifting and might not be exactly these masses the way you've shown it. I know it's very preliminary, but I mean, at first glance, I think it's more a site thing if it can work back here in the wetland stuff. But from an architectural standpoint, I think it is possible. Peter, you got anything else to add?
I
Or?
was trying to see if I could annotate, but I think, Jesse, you have to open up allow me to share.
Oh, I'm not controlling the Zoom, Peter. I think
It's Jim.
Jim's got that.
Yeah, I got it.
Jim, you're controlling everything.
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
What do you want?
I just wanted to see if I could annotate, because I had a couple of thoughts on still says you have it disabled for sharing.
So you want to, all right, I'll see if I can get this to respond to me.
Yeah.
If you want, I can request remote control. I don't know if that will help, but
Either that, Jim, or just make Peter a co-host.
Yeah, well, I'm all right.
I am. It does it to me too.
Peter, you're a co-host.
See where, yes, okay. But why don't I see it anymore? Andrew?
Looks like you just shared your screen, Peter.
Yeah, but that isn't really what I wanted to do, right? You don't want to see my calendar, do you? All my emails?
25,000 unread. You better get to it, Peter.
I know.
he's got years of reading to do. Are you gonna bring up the same thing, Peter, to sketch over? Because I can.
Yeah, I wanted to sketch over. That's what I wanted to.
Yeah, I can probably help you with it. Jim, if you want to make me a co-host, I can pull it up.
Thanks, Andrew.
No
I'll
problem.
be the voice, you be the sketch. So while Andrew's setting up, we had started to just briefly
I'm still
look at.
disabled. Oh,
You are.
You're in now.
not sure if I can sketch over it though.
But you know what, Andrew, if you don't mind, just to save time, just move your cursor there a bit. If you
Yep.
kind of look at the center of the building where the entrance is, right there, there's a bay to the right and a bay to the left. That has to be kind of the central section of the building that slips, okay? So as you have the right, the left would stay, then the two bays would shift, and then the other piece, that section of the building right there becomes one. So still three sections, but it's breaking at a different point. And the amount of shift that seemed to work, and this was done in a very sketch format, internally was about 6 feet. That's just a quick take on if we did the shift. And I think we've removed balconies, so those won't be in the sketch anymore. These ones that overhang won't be there anymore. But we do still have to allow for those bumps that happen to give us the 3-bedroom units on the right and the left and the rear.
Well,
So
but here's my thing.
yeah,
We're talking about right now, we're just talking about whether we can make it happen. All right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it seems like you can make something happen.
Good.
And from your perspective architecturally, the idea of slipping the building, you can make something happen. I don't want to get into the design of the building. I don't want to get into the plan of the building. That's the next meeting, or after the next meeting, because I think the next meeting really may involve basically Rebecca or one of those people, basically, along with Chris. And I want to talk to Chris next because he's probably more cognizant of the effect of this movement on the site plan. And if in fact architecturally we can make something like this happen, that's good. But we'll look at that eventually, just not at this moment. So the fact that you say it's possible, that's great. Now what I'd like to hear basically is from Chris and how it affects basically the wetlands and the edges basically of the parking.
Sure. Jim, is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah. Well, let me open it up to everybody. Hold on. All right, you're in.
Okay. So I'm gonna just go right ahead and share my CAD screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so Jim, we're looking at the plan that I submitted prior to the last meeting. And you probably noticed the shape of the building is a little bit different than the one that you were showing before. It has a couple of these bump outs, if you will, here and here. And then I slid the building back a little bit, which started to encroach on the wetland to I'll call it an unacceptable level, because we know what the Conservation Commission is going to be looking for. So let me explain. So the project at 598 next door, there were some sections of the project where the Conservation Commission allowed the project to go as close as 15 feet to the wetland, and they used retaining walls to get that close. There are some sections where they were able to achieve 25 feet. The Wakefield Concom has a policy where they like to see projects achieve a 25-foot no disturb zone if at all possible. And so that's what we first look at when we're looking at a project. You know, can we get to 25 feet? And clearly on this project, we cannot. But I don't dare go closer than 15 feet. And I don't want to go 15 feet across the entire wetland line if I can help it. This plan shows a retaining wall along the back left. So that would be southwest, if you will, of the building, right along this location here. And it has an irregular shape because it's exactly 15 feet away from the wetland line. Now, as we turn the corner around the back of the parking field here, we can achieve a greater setback. This line here that I'm highlighting is 25 feet away from the wetland. So we were trying really hard to try to at least keep some of the site 25 feet away. That being said, we also had something else in our back pocket, Jim, that we were considering, because we always hear about parking and that sort of thing. And one of the ideas that we have is creating some tandem spaces across a portion of the parking field in the back here to get us a few extra parking spaces that could be utilized, something like that. And so we were trying to keep that option open to us in case we wanted to add some more parking. Doing what you drew on the plan is really going to cramp. It's going to eliminate the possibility of adding this additional parking. So that's number one. And then number two, I'm not going to be able to go back as far as what you've drawn, because I have to try to maintain at least a 15-foot setback, if not 25, across a portion of this project. You're going to hear it, from Rebecca and Elaine at the next subcommittee meeting for sure. Now, how much can I, how much of the limit of disturbance will be allowed at 15 feet? I don't know. But we have to draw the line somewhere and get this through ZBA, hopefully get an approval. And at that point, we can submit to the Conservation Commission formally. So that's kind of, those are my thoughts. We can step the building, it looks like. Exactly how much we can step, depends on how close we end up getting to the wetland. And I know you mentioned the type of wetland before and that it matters. Or it might affect the setback. The regulations don't speak to setbacks from wetlands. ultimately, this is a buffer zone project. We're working in the buffer zone to the wetland. We're not altering wetlands. If this wetland turns out to become what's called an outstanding resource water, what that means is that you can't fill an outstanding resource water wetland. We weren't proposing to fill any wetlands anyway. But in terms of setback, I don't think it matters a whole lot whether this becomes an ORW or not. But in the Conservation Commission's mind, it might. They might feel that it's more sensitive because it's an ORW, and they might really push for a 25-foot setback. It's hard to know.
You said on this plan that you pulled it back off the line of the other buildings.
Yes, about 6. Well, we moved the building further back than what we had initially submitted by 6 feet. Let me show you what it looks like in relationship to the other buildings. Let me just open up this view so you can see a little bit further down. You can see that 598 is closer to North Ave than the building at 600. But if I drew a line along the front face of 600, it passes through, both of our buildings. We kind of lined ourselves up with the building at, it's actually a little bit further back, but with the building at 598, that's what we did. And that we moved the building back 6 feet from the initial submittal. So we were a little bit closer in our initial submittal.
So I think you should look at, because I think the weight is on you at the moment. We'll take it off Peter for the moment because we're not worried about the plan. Although the plan may be affected, I would still personally, and I'm not going to speak for Tom, but I'll let him speak. I personally would like to see this split, regress off to as it reaches a neighborhood. Basically, it steps back. Now, how that works out with the architecture and what space you can leave basically out back to push that parking around. And as you go back to the plan I had, basically, it basically it rotates a bit and then straightens itself out, similar to what you've got there.
Right.
Let's see if I can get this up. So, I sort of went with as the building went, I also tilted this and then straightened it out to keep away from these points along in here. And so the question is, how much do we have to push this forward to get this? Is it alignment with the other building? Or is it further, basically pushing it out only to regress further on? And how does this work out? And what are your setbacks basically in here? Is it 15 feet? Is it 20 feet? Is it 25 feet? And I would sort of leave this for the moment, this issue basically, or at least to look at, is this sort of concept that gives us the intent of getting these to set back. And eventually we'll get to the point about, the trees and the like and how dense it is and the like. But I think between the buildings and how we form the parking out here, and I'm not looking for any other parking spaces right now, and maybe we'll get to that. But I think it's tight enough right now that I'm not sure, even with your idea, basically, there's room for that. So I'd ask you study this concept and tell us how you might work it, or what the problems are going to be.
Jim, can I ask on this plan, is this assuming 4 stories or 3 stories?
I'm still working with 3.
Okay.
Yep. I think that I don't think we are looking. I mean, there's several ways that we work these. Sometimes it's stepping into the neighborhood, which means the height steps down. But in this case, I think there's nobody in the board that's looking for anything but 3 stories. And so how do we tackle this in a different manner to basically make it less destructive or appear less disoriented to the neighborhood, basically, and it would be to step it back. So how can we, I guess my push would be, how can we make that happen? And I'm less worried with, like I say, for the moment, on the architecture, because we'll get to that. But the solution at the moment lies within the master plan of this space, and therefore lies in Chris's hands, because he knows the rules.
Yeah, so I mean, if our team decided to go down this road, I can see from your sketch, Jim, that we could get pretty close to what you've drawn there and maintain a 15-foot setback. I could probably get pretty close to this idea. The question is how is that going to be received by the Concom, and is our team willing to give up on those tandem parking spaces that we were keeping in our back pocket, wondering if they would be something that we want to throw into the mix?
Well, I think you're absolutely right on the Concom part of it, basically, and that's why I say I think they're going to have to come to the next party. But you need to do some studying on this, and the extra parking I leave aside for a moment, because if you find a way while you're looking at it, great, bring it up. But at this point, I wouldn't let it disrupt the flow of a concept at this point. Doesn't mean we won't shoot it away anyway, but I think this works better for being more friendly to the neighborhood for a project that's going to be here anyway. So let's make it the best we can make it. We will not basically have the neighborhood be happy about this, but it's still going to happen. So let's make it happen in a more serene way, basically. And so I throw it at you at the moment because, like I say, you know the rules, you know what they are. As to whether COMCOM is going to weigh in a negative way or not, and even if Ellen or Rebecca come back and say, oh yeah, that will work, you still eventually got to go to COMCOM. So they can only give us a hint of where COMCOM will come from. They're not the deciding factor.
Right. Yeah, it puts us in a somewhat challenging position of getting an approval from this board and then going to conservation and then them telling us that this won't fly, and then having to come back to you with a building that may look a little bit different than what we're showing here. So that's
a couple things, Jesse. I think though, I want to at least you guys have a look at this. This reflects every comment that was made by the board members, that this needs to be a transition to the neighborhood. And Chris, I don't want to speak for Jim, but like if you're looking at this site plan, if you had to move the left portion of the building back forward a little bit to help with the setbacks, I think that portion of the building sits across from the street there. And the center portion and the right portion of the building they're across the street. Abutters are where the wood frame homes start in the neighborhood. So, and the question I would ask on parking, where are you with, I didn't think parking was an issue here. I don't have all the figures. I don't have your figures in front of me, but how many spaces are you at right now?
Sure. We were still maintaining 59 parking spaces, which yields a parking ratio right now of 1.64 spaces per unit.
And so you really think those tandem spots are going to be necessary?
Well, it was just something that the team was considering because the site lended itself to maybe adding them, allowing us to add them to the project. I don't think it's required. I don't think it's necessary. It would provide some additional parking to relieve, let's say, busy times if we ever had them. But it's not necessary.
I think we were to further answer that question, Tom. We were getting some feedback from some of the members, not necessarily yourselves, that more parking was desired, and that may have been coupled somewhat with a desire for more guest-specific parking. So that's an issue we can address through through conditions and parking management plans for the site. But just what we're looking at here, and obviously not expecting the two of you to, formally commit yourself, but would you say you're comfortable with the parking count that we're proposing? And do you think that that's something that the zoning board members would support, just as a general matter?
I think in some ways you're caught between two walls. And that is that, we want this thing to be as concealed and appropriate for the area as possible. But at the same time, we'd like to get as many parking spaces because we always understand that there's guest parking can be a problem at certain times. So I personally, I don't mind where the parking is. We'll find out as we develop this more, whether there's any issue within the board. And certainly there'll be interim reports back to the board for them to comment and even allow us to continue our direction.
Right.
And to Tom's comment about the face of the building, I don't mind if it moves ahead towards the street more to allow for what we want to do out back and get this building to step. In fact, in one light, you can look at it, if everything lines up on the street, particularly the butter, breaking that alignment, whether it's being pulled back or pushed forward, is breaking the alignment. So, can that help? Can we get the broken building, basically a slip building, by pushing it forward and get what we need to do out back? Sure, why not? Look at it, study it. Tell us what you can do. I'm not looking for one solution to come back. I'm looking for several solutions. We looked at this, we looked at that. This doesn't work because of that. This does work, but we need to adjust this. I think you got to bring something forward to us so we can comment on it, but at the same time, you can tell us what's wrong with it. And so that's where I see that probably the next meeting going. And like I say, maybe our COMCOM representative is going to attend that meeting as well. But it should be like a working session where we talk this over, and then out of that, basically say, okay, follow that lead, basically follow that side of the street. And at the same time, we can have Peter basically look at the layout. We're not going to get to the appearance of the building for a while. We're going to deal with this site to make it work in the way I think it ought to work. And then, how make sure the units fit in there. And then we'll eventually get into the appearance on the outside of the building. I mean, I personally think that this building, basically the materials, needs to be more like what's in the neighborhood as a palette, even the color, basically. So it comes, there's no reason for it to match the other two buildings. It needs to be more compatible, I think, with the neighborhood. But that will come up later. We'll see how that works out in the end, basically. So we need to concentrate right now on the master planning of this thing and the COMCOM issues and the like, and how the building sits, whether it sits forward or back or whatever. But I do want to see it split so we can have as many pieces of planting out front, which will bring the landscaper in eventually, basically, as to what we can do best to mitigate the appearance of the overall view of this building.
And I guess I'd add, Jesse, to your direct question about the parking. We would share with our fellow board members that there's competing priorities here, and getting the massing right is a big one. I also don't think on the parking, I might disagree with some of my board members. I'm fine with where the parking is, because I think if there was going to be a problem, people are going to go park in the office park across the street or in the Knights of Columbus next door if there's a guest issue. So I don't think it's something that's going to overflow into the neighborhood streets. There's alternatives for people there. I think the ratio is fine. So.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to have just as we're going forward for our planning purposes. So I think based on where the conversation is going here, we have some homework to do to look into this and see if we can make something like this work. And then convene as a team to really to assess, whether this is the direction that we want the project to go. Being cognizant of the fact that we, as presented, we think this works. We think it's permittable under the 40B statute. But that being said, we do want to work with the board and come up with a project that you're comfortable with approving, and hopefully that the neighbors and members of the public are comfortable with being their neighbors in the next few years. So I think we have some work to do from here, and so I think depending on how far along we get, Chris gets specifically, I think he's going to be having the heavy lifting to do in terms of making sure it works with the wetland line. Potentially come back for a second session with this subcommittee, and perhaps we could get Rebecca or Elaine to be in attendance on that to give their feedback as well. Does that work?
Works for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, good. Was there anything else we need to talk about tonight, or anything else you'd like to have us take a look at as we're looking at this?
No, I don't want to complicate the direction. Basically, we need to focus on things along the way, and this is the first focus in my mind that we need to deal with, and it's going to take probably 2 meetings, hopefully not 3, but once we hear from COMCOM, they may throw us a little bit of a twist, which will then throw Chris a twist. But I don't want to get bogged down with other things and get off on a tangent on other things that I don't think are as important as this at the moment. Well, I can send you this in a PDF if that helps at all. It's not to scale. It's just basically cut and paste images from some of Jesse's stuff. Oh, Chris's stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that would be
helpful.
helpful. Yeah.
All right. So if there's nothing else, I haven't heard from Dana at all.
Yep, I would love to chime in.
I haven't seen him jumping up and down or anything.
No, I've been listening quietly to all the meetings. We bought the property a few years back, and we weren't really quite sure what to do with it. We knew the buildings were to the right, and the Knights of Columbus was to the left, and the wetlands were behind it. So we really didn't think single families was the way to go. We tried to get another project approved that got denied, a lesser project. So that's how we came to this project. And I've spoke to Jake Conley, the abutter, early on in the process and a little later on in the process as well. And so we certainly want to have the neighborhood be satisfied when we're done with the building. We don't want to sacrifice more units if we don't have to. We were happy to come down to 3 stories. That's not a problem. I am aware of what's going on in town. I've been a business owner in Wakefield since 2006. So I'm aware of what's going on in town, particularly Crescent Commons, the most recent one. I do realize, it's right in the middle of a residential neighborhood, 4 stories, a lot more density there. So I don't want to be necessarily discriminated against on this project because we're near the neighborhood, but I also want to cooperate as much as we can to get this project so everybody's happy with it. So I appreciate you and Tom working with us on it very much.
Okay.
Yep, that's good. Yeah, because we know all about 40B, so we know our limitations. We appreciate the cooperation on your end. Coming down to 3 stories, I think was not lost on the board, and appreciate it.
Okay, appreciate that.
All right. Nothing else? Anybody else got anything to say? Otherwise, I'm going to close the meeting.
I'm all set. I think Peter, Chris, Andrew, anything else from you?
I'm good.
Good.
Yeah, we're
Thanks
all
for your
set.
time.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
thanks, folks.
All right. So I'm closing the meeting now at what time is it anyway?
4:47.
4:47. Thank you. End of the meeting. Thank you. We'll schedule the next meeting. Probably, how long do you guys think you need, particularly Chris?
We could get together, sometime next week if you'd like, or the week after next. I'm off next week, so, but I'll, what I'm gonna assign this to somebody in the office and, you know, it would be possible to turn it around fairly quickly.
Yeah,
So if the team wanted to get together sometime next week, I'm sure that I could get somebody to fill in for me.
all right, well, I'll leave it to Jesse to contact us and let us know the progress you're making. Basically, and it will be this following week or when you come back, one or the other. But I do, you know, the thing is, I'd like to get a hold of Elaine basically, and or Rebecca basically be at this next meeting, but that may not be possible. Maybe we want to hear from you first, and then have them follow up. I don't know. We'll see. Jesse and I will talk about that.
Yep, we'll make the arrangements. If we can get her or both of them even for the next meeting, I think that would be productive.
Okay, all right.
There.
Just
All
be
right.
prepared, Jim. 25, they're gonna be looking for 25 feet.
Yeah, well, you know, you gotta be prepared too. We're not putting, and your clients gotta be prepared. All
We
right,
will. Thank you.
thank you.